Hello and welcome to today's broadcast. Allow me to play a little bit on the xylophone. Ta-da! Thanks and welcome. I'm Davina. We're going to be talking about Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito and the credible accusation that he leaked the Hobby Lobby decision on contraceptive access to some wealthy donors to the Supreme Court who had been prevailed upon to entertain, wine and dine the justice by an evangelical minister, and I'm sure others as well, but one evangelical minister, Robert Schenck, turned whistleblower and gave congressional testimony and talked to journalists about his role in prevailing upon wealthy people to open the trappings of wealth to Supreme Court justices, to make them feel valued and cherished and indulged and flattered by wealthy donors. So there was a story, if you hadn't read up on it, in the Washington Post that went through some of Robert Schenck's testimony. And today's news is that the Supreme Court has made an announcement that they cannot find anyone responsible for the leak about the Dobbs overturning, which is to say the overturning of 50 years of American legal precedent to deny federal protections around reproductive freedom for women, i.e. the freedom to say, it's not convenient for me, it's medically dangerous, or it's emotionally dangerous for me to proceed with an unwanted pregnancy. For women to be the gatekeepers of their body and therefore the ultimate gatekeepers of how many new children are brought into this world, whether or not we are merely vessels for God's will in introducing children into the world, or if we have the capacity as decision makers to say, sometimes in concert with medical professionals, I might want this pregnancy, but my life is in danger. I'm hemorrhaging and I need medical treatment to end this pregnancy rather than have both my life and the pregnancy be ended. So some people are aware of the problems with letting the minority of people who are pro-coerced birth, pro-involuntary pregnancies, to maintain the upper hand within the American legal system and the American system of government. So yes, it was a leaked decision, leaked presumably to put pressure on the Supreme Court justices to stay the course and to continue despite opposition. And the likely leakers are people in close to the most conservative on the Supreme Court bench. So Samuel Alito and his buddy Clarence Thomas, and Clarence Thomas's conservative activist wife, Ginny Thomas. And I call her a conservative activist, but she's more like a conservative conspirator. Not only does she generate a large amount of money from her firm of lobbying for conservative interests and conservative people, but Clarence Thomas conveniently forgot to list any of that income for his wife on the mandatory disclosure form for listing spousal sources of income in order to prevent conflict of interest. So let's have a little look at what some of the good folks on Twitter say about this investigation. So it was run by a US attorney called Michael Chertoff, who turns out was replacing Samuel Alito's original position as US attorney before his appointment to the Supreme Court bench. So Michael Chertoff says that the Supreme Court did everything they could to find the leaker. They've released a report on their investigation, and yes, said can't determine on the preponderance of evidence who we found. Let's see a little extract. Some individuals admitted to investigators that they told their spouse or partner about the draft Dobbs decision and the vote count in violation of the court's confidentiality rules. So apparently the court has rules that say don't disclose to your partner or spouse a decision ahead of the decision being released. Several personnel told investigators they had shared confidential details about their work more generally with their spouses, and some indicated they thought it permissible to provide such information to their spouses. Some personnel handled the Dobbs draft in ways that deviated from their standard process for handling draft opinions. So they knew it would be a controversial decision, and they dealt with the weight on their conscience of their awareness of that controversy by violating the standard procedures and violating the rules about maintaining confidentiality and telling their spouses. And also, another surprising fact, Michael Chertoff didn't think it prudent to interview justices. So when they say court personnel, they're not even talking about justices. They're talking about clerks, etc. Okay. So the draft majority opinion was circulated on February the 10th in 2022, and Politico published the draft opinion on the evening of May the 2nd. So they formed the draft opinion by February the 2nd, but it was leaked by May the 2nd, so February the 10th. The investigation focused on court personnel, temporary law clerks, and permanent employees who had or may have had access to the draft opinion during the period from the initial circulation until the publication by political news outlet Politico. In the initial phase, investigators sought to gain an understanding of the details of the opinion circulation process, the court's policies and training addressing confidentiality, laws, if any, that were potentially violated by the unauthorized disclosure, and IT policies in place concerning the handling of sensitive information. So all these policies, but it turns out those policies were very easily violated by someone. Only Michael Chertoff didn't think it prudent to interview justices or spouses. Actual justices. Somebody sarcastically points out that our only clue is that it rhymes with schmalito. I'm tempted to go through some of the evidence that I discussed earlier. Robert Schenck, S-C-H-E-N-C-K. I'm going to Google Robert Schenck testimony because, to me, the most revealing detail that he gave in support of his whistleblower testimony was an email sent to him, or was it a text message? A text message that said, "Please, no emails." We'll have a look. So it was an influence peddling scheme. Just going to see if I can find something right now. Schenck, who in recent years has broken with the religious right over issues including abortion and gun rights, said he encouraged his recruits to use tactics like donations to the Supreme Court Historical Society to meet justices and to parlay those encounters into deeper relationships to achieve their objectives. Some recruits wrote amicus briefs. Amicus, Latin word meaning friendly, so it's a friend of the court, sort of like writing a letter of recommendation in favor of one side of an argument in relation to a court case. So some of these wealthy donors wrote amicus briefs in cases before the court, meaning they're like, yes, it's so important for women to be limited in their opportunities and their choices about what to do, and for doctors to be confused about whether or not they can treat a woman who is mid-pregnancy but who is hemorrhaging. Should maybe just make the law vague enough so that the doctors will send women home so that they can just bleed for a few days and we can determine if their life actually is threatened. Just make women's medical care during pregnancy that much more fraught with danger for women and girls. Thank you so much. That'll make us feel better about valuing the lives of children at the cost of the lives of actual mothers and people who intend to be mothers in the future, or just women who don't want to be mothers. And of course, I don't want to leave out girls because there is a higher rate of death and disability associated with pregnancy for teenagers than many people are aware of. Many people are aware of women having potentially more risks associated with pregnancies when they're over a certain age, but also when they're under a certain age as well. Pregnancies for for teen and young teenagers is strongly associated with a higher incidence of adverse medical events and negative outcomes for girls that proceed with carry a pregnancy to term when they're between the ages of 12 and 16. All right, Robert Schenk, I want to find the email. Schenk told the Times last month that Operation Higher Court succeeded in breaching the court's code of silence, arguing that stealth missionaries Gail and Don Wright, spelt W-R-I-G-H-T, learned the outcome of a high-profile 214 religious freedom case. It's called religious freedom. It was a limitation to women's reproductive freedom because it was allowing an employer, Hobby Lobby, to decline to include contraceptive treatments, contraceptive measures in their healthcare coverage policies for their staff. So if you're a woman working at Hobby Lobby, maybe your female friend working for a Hobby Lobby competitor, they get their contraceptive pills paid for, their intrauterine devices paid for, things that they take to exercise a degree of control and influence over their own lives. But Hobby Lobby's court case made it legal for employers to exclude contraceptive coverage, reproductive coverage in their policies with regards to their employees. So stealth missionaries Gail and Don Wright learned the outcome of that case whilst dining at Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr.'s house before the opinion was released. The Wrights then shared that information with Robert Schenk, an evangelical minister who cultivated stealth missionaries. Hobby Lobby leak story is only the latest bit of evidence that Alito's purported distinction here has been meaningless, embarrassing horseshit, part of a transparent effort to repackage policymaking by judicial fiat as the product of just anodyne legal processes. Anodyne's a bit of a $5 word. It means painless. It means anodyne things help reduce pain. So painless, not rock the boat, just legal processes, when Alito is actually legislating from the bench. He's advancing policies and outcomes in America that are very significant for people's lives, whilst claiming to just be upholding the Constitution. And, his hands are tied. He's just an originalist. He's a stealth missionary as well. Alito is and always has been what he has long insisted he is not, a loyal Republican foot soldier who happens to work across the street from the Capitol instead of inside it. Alito has also strenuously denied that he or his wife shared any information about the outcome of Hobby Lobby versus Burwell, and Gail Wright has denied that she learned about the outcome from them, and her husband Don Wright is now deceased. Schenk testified under oath, subject to penalty for perjury for lying to Congress. Neither Alito nor Gail Wright have testified under oath. Still looking for that email. The arrival of Chief Justice John Roberts Jr. in 2005 ushered in a more relaxed and less guarded atmosphere inside the court that made it easier for his stealth missionaries to operate, Schenk said in his written testimony. According to that testimony, he arranged for the president of Hobby Lobby and his wife to attend a court Christmas party where they could talk to Roberts and other likely sympathetic members of the court about their plan to establish a Bible museum in Washington. Here we go. Email from Gail Wright. Okay. So Schenk's written testimony also disclosed a previously unreported detail of the alleged leak of the Hobby Lobby ruling, a landmark decision by Alito that involved contraceptives and religious rights. After Faith and Action, a group established by Robert Schenck, sent a message to donors praising the opinion and Alito, Schenck wrote he received an email from Gail Wright. Oh no, this is not the email. I sent your email about Hobby Lobby case to Sam. He sent me back an email saying he appreciated your comments very much. How about that? No. All right, well, at least now I know the terms to look at. Gail Wright, email, Robert Schenck. Hobby Lobby, no email. It's not an email. I think it's a text message that says, no emails, please. Okay, oh, here we go. Dun, dun, dun. I might share this on the screen so everybody can see what I'm seeing. Oh, there's 2 comments and I've missed them. Bob is here. New York City is offering free abortion pills at, so far, 1 clinic and to be expanded. So it is nice that there are some people out there helping increase options for women. But of course, that doesn't help the women in various states that can't access or are afraid to access mailed out abortion pills or pregnancy termination medication, because they're concerned now that the law will, the new laws, the removal of the protection of DOBs will potentially land them in prison. And it does, people can be influenced by where they perceive the direction of the law and the sympathy of the law lies. So, I mean, if women don't want to have an abortion, then fine. If they're wavering and they wanted a friend or a family member to influence them to make the determination if they had enough support to carry a pregnancy to term and to bring a child into the world and care for and support that child until for their in home until they're 18 or for longer if the child has special needs. Okay. So what I've put up here is a story. I'm going to make it larger. It's just relevant to today's story that there's no leak. Here we go. Former anti-abortion leader says he was told of the decision of Hobby Lobby weeks before the Supreme Court ruling was formally announced. And outcome was known only to a small contingent of individuals. The leak met with a furious response. So Gail Wright suggested that in their table conversation with Alito, she might be able to learn the status of the case, something she knew I had an interest in knowing. I received a follow-up message from her notifying me she had indeed obtained the information during that visit. We spoke on the phone and she detailed the revelation. As I recall, we talked about the Green family, owners of Hobby Lobby, and how they too would be interested in this information. The Times, after analysing emails and conversations, said they found statements that strongly suggested Schenck had knowledge of the ruling and the author of the Hobby Lobby decision weeks before the decision reached the news. Schenck told the Times that after sending the letter to Chief Justice Roberts to say, I know about a leak, I was the recipient of a leak, he didn't receive a response. So this is the email. The New York Times reviewed a June 2014 email from Schenck donor Gail Wright, who had dined alongside her spouse with Alito and his wife Martha Ann, where she reached out to the minister informing him that she had interesting news to share. Rob, If you want some interesting news, please call. No emails, Wright wrote, per the Times report. So he called her. No emails, he was instructed. Schenck told the Times that in that phone call, Wright let him know the High Court's decision would be favourable to Hobby Lobby. Okay, so this is to me, this key sentence, this text message. Rob, if you want some interesting news, please call. No emails. Why is it interesting? No emails shows consciousness of the impropriety of the leak, that she didn't want to leave a paper trail. She didn't want to leak information via email. Please call. She only wanted to tell him using her voice over the phone in a way that she was confident she wouldn't be recorded. She was confident the CIA or the FBI weren't listening to her phone calls or tapping them in the expectation that she, a wealthy donor to the Supreme Court Historical Society, was improperly leaking information. These are people who just feel lit up by their own conviction of their own righteousness. This is the nuts and bolts of the mechanism by which a minority of wealthy theocrats in this country are seeking to make other people's lives worse. And if you love your children, you might want to say, well, how can being forced to have a child against your will make your life worse? Children are a wonderful surprise, or even if you didn't anticipate it being wonderful, you'll thank us in the end that we forced you to proceed with a pregnancy against your will. You'll be grateful because pro-life. They are leaking decisions, they are violating protocol because it gives them a sense of satisfaction to dominate you, to dominate women who may be making very soundly reasoned decisions not to bring a child into the world at a particular point in time, and who don't deserve punishment for having had a sexual relationship with their partner or someone else. The kind of people who get off on judging other people and saying, well, if I needed a termination of a pregnancy, then it wouldn't be an abortion, it would be a legitimate event. But if you need an abortion, then it's murder. Because my circumstances are obviously justified, and you belong to a class of people that are all subject to bad, selfish motivations. I am noble, regardless of what I do and what I need, and you are base and lesser. And a functional democracy does not allow those people to reinforce their power and their convictions by just spreading around their cash and influence. Their cozy dinners together with justices of the Supreme Court at fancy restaurants, where justices leak decisions and then help people create support in the public arena for those controversial decisions by celebrating and going, hooray, Hobby Lobby's had a wonderful victory. Hooray for the lucky babies who will now be born into a world to parents who don't want to have a child or another child, for parents whose resource, biological parents, because it may not be an intact family, maybe a wife who wants to leave an abusive husband and who inadvertently falls pregnant at a bad time. It may be a girlfriend whose boyfriend is abusive as well and coerced her into sexual relationships, or who she has been maintaining a sexual relationship to keep the peace. Women sometimes have sex with men to keep the peace because women sometimes do what men want, and vice versa. But there exists occasionally a mismatch in desire between people. It's not guaranteed to be one gender over the other, but there is definitely a mixture of biological and sociological causative factors that lead a lot of men to expect sex as a reward as an entitlement, and to just deprive women of the ability to gatekeep their own bodies is a form of brute force domination. I'm going to write that down, because sometimes when a society is locked in an escalating fascist dynamic, people start to admire force. They start to be encouraged to channel their frustrations and their impatience towards celebrating someone who appears forceful and strong. I'm writing that down. Encouraged to channel their impatience and frustrations into celebrating force and the appearance of strength. It's not always the appearance of strength. It is strong to impose your will on other people. That is a form of strength. It's just not a form of strength I would endorse. So that's why I'm matching it with a negative word. Brute force. It is a brutal thing to do to a woman or a girl, to compel her to carry a child against her will. And 10-week-old cells don't closely resemble a putative human being, but they're often misrepresented in so-called pro-life literature. They'll show tiny humanoid creatures when really 10 weeks old fetal tissue does not resemble a very, very tiny baby. It resembles some microscopic clouds. All right. Bob is sharing a story with us, and I'm going to read it. A friend you've known for 50 years stopped by. He had a dent in his car, and when asked what happened, he said he was hit by an immigrant. As soon as he said that, he could tell by the look on my face he knew he made a mistake. I said his dad would be ashamed of him, and we don't speak like that about our neighbours. And he needs to look back on his family's struggle to come here. We spoke for a while. He apologised and understood what he sounded like. That is a beautiful story, Bob. The fact that he could read your face. You modelled for the rest of us how to do social consequences for succumbing to the temptations of fascist rhetoric, whereby you forget the contributions of migrants and you lean into resentment. I'm writing that down because it's a balance. You know, I'm never trying to make an argument that all migrants are perfect model citizens and never commit a crime or never make a mistake and never break the road rules. But if you lean into Tucker Carlson style rhetoric that immigrants are unwanted guests, unwanted and ungrateful guests who are undermining your country, who are taking things from you, then you have lent into a dynamic where you are ready to interpret everything as theft, that you are authentic, entitled, and deserving, and they are greedy, thieving, entitled, unreasonably entitled, bad people. And that schema of that framework, it primes you psychologically to interpret any errors as not just being an error that individual happened to make, but as part of a rationale for opposing all immigration and punishing immigrants for their very existence in this country. And applied broadly, it will tip some people over the edge into anti-migrant violence or violence towards anybody with the misfortune to look different in that person's eyes in a moment where they're feeling most stressed and their propensity towards violent impulse, acting out on violent impulses is the highest. It raises people's baseline level of embrace of violence. So even if they don't do the violent act themselves, they could justify it. They could vote for someone who encourages it, like Trump. They could vote for Republicans generally who support and prop up Trump and support and prop up the type of violent rhetoric, the violent priming rhetoric that says we real Americans and they fake, greedy, undeserving Americans. Leans into resentment, unreasonable levels of resentment, causes you to have amnesia for the contributing benefits brought to the United States from migration and migrants at a collective level. So that even if one person is imperfect and bangs into your car, that the balance of emotions should be still a determination to be civilized, to be mutually respectful. These are all ways in which Tucker Carlson, as a tool of Rupert Murdoch and other right-wing billionaires, corrodes our collective resolve to be civilized, to act in ways that are mutually respectful, I'd like to just stop here and thank Christopher for encouraging me to have a notebook by my bed, or at least to make more consistent use of a notebook, because I do scroll things down a lot. But somebody else encouraging me to write things down really helps me in a multi-level way to value what I write, because there's part of me that's always valued what I write. I'm like, these are interesting thoughts, saying, yep, fascism is a concerted movement to corrode or erode our resolve to be civilized to each other. And once you do that, it uncovers our ability to be violent and rageful and to seek strength and comfort by ganging up against others or tolerating the process of escalating ways of ganging up against each other, including at a level of government. And when you get state level ganging up on minorities, then you have historical events such as the Holocaust, or in Stalin's Russia, you have the camps, the gulags, the mass extermination of Ukrainians through government-created famine conditions. Yes, so Molly is also happy journaling her thoughts, and helps that is a process that keeps her sane and is helpful in keeping her sane. A lot of people recommend journaling for that same reason, that it helps to keep your thoughts in order and it centers you and things. But I have another reason for wanting to engage in journaling, which is I always have this ambition to write articles and to do the work in a way that has some longevity to it, that isn't just part of a temporary broadcast that's shared to the airwaves, but dissipates into the ether pretty quickly and can be forgotten. I want to make a more lasting contribution to the discourse, to be part of a movement to strengthen our collective commitment to being mutually respectful. And that's why I support Karl Popper's idea that there is a paradox of tolerance. And if you tolerate the intolerant for a protracted period of time, then you are letting them dominate you, and you are letting them not just dominate you, but erode civilization to the point where mass death becomes possible, where brute force becomes possible and irrational vendettas become actualized at the level of mass carnage. And Bob says, I think by using the word neighbor struck him more than anything else I said. That's a very valuable insight, Bob, and I'm going to liken it back to my experience working in daycares with children and working as a teacher, that when you draw on identity in that way, preschool teachers and teachers of young children might say friends. We don't hit our friends. We don't say things like that to our friends. and used the word neighbor and reminded him of our mutual commitment to coexisting as neighbors, that people who migrate to America, even people who irregularly migrate to America, are still our neighbors. They are still just as likely to be taxpayers and employees and people who coexist peacefully with us, and that to participate in a movement to erode that trust between neighbors by denigrating people, by using the word immigrant negatively, like, yep, an immigrant did this to me, which is introducing an element of disdain from the very fact of being an immigrant. It carries the connotation of, yep, I was involved or my car was bumped by an immigrant means that everything they did, every part of their error that they made wasn't just attributable to a lapse of concentration or anything like that. I'm going to be part of a pattern of attributing all these negative connotations to the word immigrant. But you took that away and said neighbor, and that helped your neighbor touch base emotionally with that part of his identity, which would have been cultivated in times where America didn't quite have as much fascist destabilizing activity going on, didn't have a Trump, and had at least some people in his life assuring him that America is a beautiful country where we welcome immigrants as our neighbors. And people put time and effort into those type of awareness raising efforts, particularly after wars in which the downside of mass negative campaigning against people for being immigrants or for being Jews resulted in such widespread carnage, bloodshed, devastation, infrastructure collapse, everything, all of the hardships you can think of associated with World War II. And my attention has been drawn to the fact that in wars, children often are disproportionately harmed, probably because they can't as easily pick up their lives and move on if their caregivers have been killed, if they've been dislocated from their customary environment. It's not as easy for them to just find their feet because they're children, they're still dependents. So children are disproportionately victimized when adults forget themselves, forget their responsibility to their communities, to their societies enough that war happens, because war is a failure of diplomacy. It's a failure of our ability to keep each other's worst impulses in check as well. War is a failure to contain aspiring demagogues. War is a failure to reject people like Trump, like Hitler, like Stalin, and to say your tactics of mobilizing hatred against other people because of their identity, your tactics of amplifying our tendencies to make negative attributions to people because they are migrants, because they are different, to find satisfaction and complacency in our ability to reinforce ourselves as authentic and them as other. That if we fail to do that job adequately, then we have been part of a society's descent into war. So it's a betrayal of children as well as being a betrayal of just the standards of civilization. So Molly's giving you a love heart for that, Bob. Me too. And it's very important to me because that's always what I want to encourage more of. It's part of the aims of this broadcast and everything else I do, to encourage people to make an effort with their neighbors. And I'm so happy that Bob is finding real ways to do this in the world. You're more established in the United States than I am, Bob, so you have pre-existing relationships with neighbors. I've tried to be a good influence on my neighbors as well, and I've learned that I'm possibly in a position to start their thinking processes. Possibly. I don't have any hard evidence of that. But 68% of white men voted for Trump. and 53% of white women, which means if we're white and if we are concerned and even appalled by Trumpism and the hood off, out in the open racism of Republicans, the determination to to obstruct American interests, to perhaps sabotage Americans' credit standing and credit rating by abusing congressional policies and procedures to say oppose an increase of the debt ceiling and say no, we're going to make America default on its debts in violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which says America will not go back on honoring its debts. America will always honor its debts, and that's an amendment to the Constitution because the founding generation understood the worth of reputation, of upholding your reputation as a nation that honors its debts and is responsible. The Republicans are prepared to jettison that reputation, that incredibly valuable and stabilizing reputation, in order to obtain better leverage for themselves and deprive the president and the Democratic majority in the Senate from and the previous Democratic majority in the House from continuing with legislation. They want to sabotage Social Security, Medicare payments, all manner of payments that are the glue of this country's functionality, in order to achieve more of their agenda, which tends to be very counter the actual day-to-day quality of life for Americans. So Bob has a story also about an enslaved person in Boston told the local doctor about how when he lived in Africa, they would use the diseased people to vaccinate the villagers, and it worked in that Boston outbreak. But if we look it up, we might find out what it is. Mm-hmm. Well, that's something to work on going forwards. I have a book called Obscure Events in History that shaped them, and I think one of them was a response to a plague in San Francisco, and what people learned about the need to uphold quarantine, even if some people object to it, to be strict with public health measures in order to save lives. But I will also look into that story of somebody in Boston bringing an understanding of medical practices in their region of Africa to the doctors in Boston. That sounds interesting. I've got this little insider graphic playing on there, but it's just because I still wanted to highlight this bit here. Rob, if you want some interesting news, please call. No emails. No emails. No emails. They know what they're doing is wrong. No emails because they want to boss you around without consequence. If you and your wife, if you and your partner, if you're male or if you're female, your own body is on the line because these people are leaking decisions about contraception, decisions about abortion access. They are doing it because they are stealth missionaries and they are winding each other up to believe that they deserve to have this power over you, that they are benevolent despots, that even though the decisions will be unpopular and against a majority of public opinion, that they know better and they ought to have the ability to tell you what to do, to get between a girl and her doctor, or a teenager and her doctor, or a woman and her doctor, to say, regardless of your own wishes, you have to proceed with this pregnancy, or regardless of the risks of proceeding with this pregnancy, our our hands are tied with regards to concern for preserving your life or preserving the integrity of your bodily systems, you might lose your uterus. You might bleed so much that you can't have any children in the future, and you experience sufficient necrotizing of tissue in your reproductive system. That cannot be our primary concern anymore. Our primary concern has to be compliance with the law, and the law has been made by judicial fiat from the Supreme Court bench of conservative justices. Many actors have played a role in this leveraging of minoritarian bullying of the rest of America, minoritarian sabotaging of the interests of the majority, the interests and wishes and expectations of the majority. We need to look at the strategies by which they do that to raise awareness of the fact that it's happening at all, and that therefore people need to be vigilant in what they inadvertently support with their silence, that their silence is taken as a type of consent, and that it requires speaking out and emboldening each other to speak out. So that, yes, attending a rally might not obviously yield an immediate outcome, but attending a rally shows you the decent, serious, concerned faces of your peers who are, like you, represent millions of others who don't want their children, their romantic partners, their wives, their spouses to have to put up with conditions in which their lives are disposable because medical care is compromised by legal concerns within a hospital or a medical practice, that it will violate the law if you don't protect the fetus, even at the expense of the mother, that you don't protect the fetus against the explicit wishes of the mother, who may say, I cannot love and care for a child at this point in time. I definitively know that I do not have the emotional or financial resources, and it's not free to have a baby in the United States. I've had 2 babies for free in Australia. Did not cost me a cent other than gas money to drive to my appointments with a midwife for weekly ultrasounds and at different parts. It wasn't always weekly, sometimes it's monthly. Gets more frequent towards the end of a pregnancy. There were obstetricians, gynecologists on call in the hospital. I only needed 2 midwives to deliver my second baby, and 1 midwife mostly helped me deliver my first. Did not cost me a cent. And that's a function of a society that values the decision of consenting to a pregnancy. It says, thank you for doing that. And as a society, as a wealthy society, we will help assist you bring that life into the world. And we show the value we attach to that of bringing in a child into this society by making this free. This is free for you. This is important medical care. Your life should not be at risk through this process of giving birth. You need medical support while you go through labor, which is still risky to women. American mortality rates, maternal mortality rates for women is higher than any other country in the developed world. Trump's health care plan had pregnancy as a pre-existing condition that wasn't covered. That makes sense? Yep. Surface talk say that you value pregnancy, that you value your pro-life, your pro-birth, but in real terms, you don't. You only have to show your support by something by talking about it. You don't have to have any government support. And they can act like that because they've undermined the very concept of governance, of efficient, helpful governance in the United States by repeatedly chanting slogans like government is bad, by both siding the 2 political parties, saying they're all the same and equally corrupt or dysfunctional. So both Republican voters and non-Republican voters who just say, I don't vote because everybody's terrible, I hold them equally emotionally responsible for bad government outcomes in the United States. driven by people's failure to vote for the more responsible party, the party that actually believes in effective government. Oh, in Trump's healthcare plan, drug addiction was also not covered, and oddly, erectile dysfunction was covered. It's odd unless you go, oh, yeah, I recognize that white Christian patriarchal dominance is a type of hegemony that voting for Republicans helps to prop up. It's a status quo that is maintained and expanded through the act of voting for Republicans or failing to vote for Democrats. And I've been wanting to brainstorm. In fact, I think I tweeted today that I wanted to brainstorm ways of social consequences to show people that you don't approve of either their both sidesing of politics or their commitment to denigrating immigrants and having respect for Republican politicians. There's got to be a social consequence, which can be shown as easily as by facial expression. Oh, both sides, eh? Oh, your neighbor's an immigrant, that's your condemnation of their behavior on the basis of them being an immigrant. Oh, I thought we were all neighbors, and your family, I thought, brought you up better than that. Bob is living out a path of applying social consequences to revelations from the people he knows that they are participating in destructive practices, societally destructive practices, community corrosive practices. So more white people need to do this because it is on us. It's our fellow white citizens, 68% of white men, 53% of white women, according to analyses of this stuff. And there's often very within demographics, peer-to-peer influence. So white people definitely need to do more to shoulder the burden of educating each other about how being racist isn't just something done by people in a white sheet. Tolerating racism is another way of upholding a system that disadvantages some and advantages others at the expense of racial minorities. Particularly, anti-Black sentiment is an animating principle for a lot of behavior still in the United States and other countries around the world. But if we're concerning ourselves with the United States, then here is where it starts, to raise your eyebrows at people who make racist remarks so that they know you do not approve. And if you can say anything in support of pro-equality measures, recognition of humanity, pro-humanist sentiments that show you understand that we are all human, and trying to pick a pattern out of events to say that it's fair to be dismissive of the worth of certain human demographics, that's not just racist, it's destructive. It's destructive of the ties that bind us together as cooperative humans, and for our species to flourish, for our children to survive in happy, healthy communities. We need to do more than just exist alongside racists. We need to be actively anti-racist. That's my message for today. Thank you to all who listened. I'm off, and take care. Talk to you all soon. Oh, we'll get back to that. Thanks everybody for chatting today. Thanks Molly and Bob and Christopher. Take care, all of you, and to any other viewers out there as well. If you enjoyed the broadcast, please feel free to share it, promote it, or recommend it to anybody. And yes, ciao.